Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to our next session, Geopolitical Reconfigurations, Confronting the Collapse of Multilateralism and the Rise of New Power Dynamics. With me on the stage, former Minister of Foreign Affairs from Arab Republic of Egypt, His Excellency Sameh Shoukry. Thank you very much for joining us. Former Secretary of State for Defense and then International Trade in UK and current chairman of the UK Abraham Accords Group, Sir Liam Fox. Thank you very much for having us here. National Security Advisor to the Prime Minister of Slovak Republic, former Minister of Foreign and European Affairs, former Deputy Prime Minister, and also former Ambassador to Japan and Federal Republic of Macedonia and Albania, His Excellency Miroslav Lajčák. Ambassador, Director General of Cairo International Center for Conflict Resolution, Peacekeeping and Peace Building, former Ambassador to Gabon, former Deputy Assistant Minister of Foreign Affairs for UN Specialized Agencies, His Excellency Saif Kandil. Member of Parliament for French Expatriates, French Republic, His Excellency Karim Benchiek. Last but not least, former head of the French military mission to the UN from French Republic, General Dominique Trinquant. And my name is Liliana Śmiech. I'm Director General for International Affairs at the Ludovica University of Public Service, and I have honor of moderating this important session. Power is shifting. Thank you. Power is shifting. Traditional mechanisms are losing its authority. New coalitions rise as old structures struggle to manage conflict, technology, and rivalry. The real question, I would say, is not whether the multilateralism is collapsing, but whether it is evolving towards something more plural, more competitive, and maybe more sovereign. And let us begin with the opening question to all of our panelists. Are we witnessing the decline of the multilateral order, or merely it's a transition towards a more power balance, sovereignty-driven architecture? And I would like to start with His Excellency Shoukry.
Thank you very much. I'm happy to be participating once again in the MEDays Forum, and I appreciate the opportunity and that this is directed towards a conversation primarily for the South, between the South, but of course other points of view are also very much welcome and needed. I would take with a measure of a degree of reservation the idea of collapse. The multilateral system is certainly challenged. It is wobbly, to say the least, but it still does hold the imagination of the international community and does incorporate many of the ideals of shared principles that have governed international relations over the past 7 to 8 decades. There are principles that I believe are well regarded and well held, the Charter of the United Nations, but the institutions have been lacking in their ability to implement and to forge ahead in building a stronger foundation of cooperation architecture to maintain security and peace, and there's a recognition of a need for reform. But certainly whether it's the United Nations and the long-standing discussion on the reform of the Security Council, that the United Nations was established at a time when many, especially on the African continent, were under colonial rule. So the issue of representation and equal representation, democratization, governance is a matter that has to be addressed. But then how do we contend with those who have acquired special status and that have lost to a degree their influence and their ability to provide the leadership and the guidance? Also, the financial institutions, I think, have demonstrated their lack of capability in dealing with the needs, especially of the South, the structures that are in place, the predominant influence that certain countries have in terms of the decision-making process of those institutions is flawed, and maybe in the most very apparent degree is the issue of how to deal with climate change. Now, the multilateral system still operates within the climate mechanisms of the United Nations, but the departure of the United States has made a substantial blow to that process. The outcomes of Brazil have shown the vulnerabilities that exist and the lack of a political will to forge ahead and deal with a very substantial issue of scientific nature, where countries still do not recognize the need, especially in the South, of greater finance, justice, and an ability to deal with both mitigation and adaptation, and provide the finance that everybody recognizes could be beneficial not only in terms of climate, but also in terms of developmental objectives. So the multilateral system is being challenged. The rule-based order is being challenged, where more perspective is that might is right. And this is a dangerous perspective, because if it applies globally, it will apply regionally, it will apply interregionally, and thereby we can find ourselves with a escalating degree of conflicts and a lack of ability to resolve it, except if military power and the ability to enforce the political will through military force is the only way forward.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency. So I think we can agree that the system has been challenged, but I would like to ask Sir Liam Fox. So the system has been challenged. Is it already the decline, or rather a transition towards something new, something different?
Well, I think if institutions do not evolve, then ultimately they will fail. And I think that most of the institutions that we've taken for granted in recent years were designed post-World War II for the second half of the 20th century. They have not particularly well adapted to what's now the second quarter of the 21st century and the changes in geopolitics. And I think that all of the trends that we had have been exacerbated by the pandemic. And I don't think that politicians really have taken full account of the impact of the pandemic, not just on global economics, but on the psyche of nations and how we think about our connections to the world around us. If you look economically, first of all, at that, the support that was applied in the pandemic economically was equivalent to 14% of GDP. There's a massive amount of money to be spent supporting businesses, individuals through the pandemic. And that resulted in, of course, much higher spending, but also the hangover of much higher debt and much higher borrowing, which has to be dealt with in a global financial way. In the United Kingdom, for example, our government debt is now back to the levels of the 1960s, when we were recovering our spending from World War II. And the very slow recovery, as a result of all of these things, has left voters angry, populations angry, not really sure what the antidote to their anger is, but we've seen them casting around all sorts of ways in democratic countries. It's worth noting that since the end of the pandemic, there have been 54 elections in Western countries, and the incumbents have lost 42 of those elections. It's a tangible measure of the anger and the frustration of voters out there. This has left behind a legacy of lack of money. You've seen a reduction in aid budgets and the money flowing into multilateral institutions. And when confronted with all these various pressures, there has been a tendency to roll back on easy decision-making instead of the difficult challenges we face in making multilateral decisions. Countries have fallen back where they can on unilateral decision-making or bilateral decisions because it's quicker, tends to produce an easier result for them. And combined with the failing institutions, most of which need a big overhaul. I was writing a book in 2012, and I had lunch with Condoleezza Rice, and we gave one another a piece of paper with all the global institutions on it and asked each other to give marks out of 10. And for 9 out of the 10 institutions that we marked, we had identical marks on them. And I think all of this, and the reason that we're finding perhaps a bit of a wobble in the concept and the application of multilateralism is that falling back on nationalism in this way for these economic reasons has given a new freedom and breath of life to the international rivalries that always existed, but except I think have been given a bit of oxygen as a consequence of all of these factors. So I don't think multilateralism is collapsing. I think it faces quite a challenge, but the quicker we are able to recover our equilibrium and return, as His Excellency said, to a future based on shared values and an understanding of what has made such phenomenal progress in the last half century, the quicker we get back there, the safer and more prosperous we will all be wherever we are in the world.
Thank you very much. Your Excellency Lajczak, would you agree that if the institutions don't evolve, then we are taking them for granted and we need the change? And of course, I would be very happy to hear your opinion whether the multilateralism is collapsing or not. Because for now we have, I would say, quite similar opinions on it, so please.
Yes, good afternoon everyone, and this is a very important discussion we are having right now, and the fact that we don't argue here, at least until now, it means that we all share the same concerns. You ask whether the multilateral system is in decline or in transition, I would say both. It definitely is in decline because we are unable to solve the challenges we are facing right now, and probably the latest example is the COP30. The fact is that we need a multilateral system. It's not a coincidence that multilateral system, as we know, it was built after the World War II when the smart men and women of this planet came together and said we need to make sure that this inferno will never be repeated. That's why the first sentence of the UN Charter says the we people of the United Nations want to prevent the future generations from the scourge of the war. And this system has delivered for some 50 years, but as you indicated, failed to adapt to change realities. Today's world is different from what it was 1945, and there are new realities, there are new countries who have grown and who want to have their say and who want to have their seat at the table, and the international organizations were unable to adjust to it. So therefore, many countries, particularly from Africa, Asia, Latin America, felt underrepresented, had the feeling that these organizations do not represent them. And therefore, the organization started, and I'm speaking about the United Nations, of which I feel very strongly myself, and I had the chance to, and the honor to be the president of the UN General Assembly. Many countries of this world did not feel that these organizations represent them. And this goes particularly about the UN Security Council. So we, plus second, we currently live in the world where there is an absence of rules. It looks like everyone can violate rules, and there is no authority which is able or empowered to enforce rules and to demand that rules are respected and obeyed. And that's the decline part. The transition part is also obvious. The challenges we are facing as humankind cannot be addressed by any country individually, because these challenges do not respect national borders. So that there is a clear case for multilateralism and for working together. But right now, as Mr. Shukri said, we see philosophy of might is right. I can afford something, so I will do it. I don't care about the consequences because this is what I want, this is what I need as a country. But this is not how this planet, how this humanity can move forward. So therefore, we are in a process of transition, but we don't know where this transition is going. We don't know who is leading this transition. It's certainly not inclusive transition. And therefore, I do not have very good feeling about this transition, because if we continue the trend we see right now, we will end up with different centers of powers. We will end up with spheres of influence where the countries who believe are strong enough will create their own rules that will apply in their spheres of influence. And that would be a shame for humanity, for this planet in the 21st century, because what we really need is a universal system, because the challenges we are facing are of universal nature.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency. That's, I think, very good question. Who is leading the transition? Where are we going? And what these different centers of power would be in the future. Now I would like to go to Ambassador Kandil. The same question, open question to all of our speakers. Are we witnessing the decline? Or, as everyone already mentioned, this inevitable transition of the system?
Thank you very much, and I'd like to start by thanking MEDays for inviting CCCPA to this very important forum. It's an honor to be on this distinguished panel next to our former boss, the leader of Egyptian diplomacy for over a decade, Minister Shukri. It's a great honor for me. Well, let me get directly to your question. Yes, there's something collapsing, but it's not multilateralism. It's this unipolar moment that we have been witnessing since the 90s. There's another thing that's collapsing. The end of history is collapsing. This argument that globalization, unchecked globalization, will deliver trickle-down benefits to everybody across the world. This actually left millions of lower middle class in the West as well as in the South, who are the losers of globalization. They didn't benefit from globalization. They got alienated for many years, and eventually they turned against globalization. So I think that has nothing to do with multilateralism or the rise of geopolitical competition. This has always been there. Living next to multilateralism, whether in the Cold War or in the 19th century. So I think what we need right now is to deal with these alienated people who actually started their grievances were picked up by new elites, if you want. New elites, new populist elites who were challenging the global elites that designed the system in the first place.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. And now we will go to His Excellency Benčiak. And I would ask exactly the same question, whether the multilateralism is collapsing or not.
Oui. Merci pour, déjà pour l'invitation. J'ai peut-être répété un petit peu ce qu'on dit un certain nombre des interlocuteurs ici, mais quand même, il y a quelque chose qu'on doit souligner. Enfin, quand on parle d'effondrement du multilatéralisme, on a parfois l'impression, là, tel qu'on l'entend, de décrire une catastrophe naturelle, vous savez. C'est comme si le système s'écroulait tout seul. Pourtant, ce n'est pas la réalité. Il y a aussi une chose à laquelle nous assistons en ce moment, c'est un démantèlement méthodique du multilatéralisme. C'est ça aussi ce à quoi nous assistons. Vu d'Europe, en tout cas, moi c'est de là où je vais essayer de parler, nous avons assisté à 3 ruptures majeures, il me semble. C'est d'une part le retour de la guerre sur le territoire européen qui s'est accompagné du retrait de la garantie de sécurité américaine et donc qui met à mal tout le système de défense européen fondé sur l'OTAN, etc. Nous avons eu, après les massacres terroristes du 7 octobre, une violation par un gouvernement désinhibé du droit international humanitaire. Ça, c'est aussi une grande rupture. Et enfin, nous avons eu, avec le retrait américain, ou en tout cas l'accélération de ce retrait avec l'arrivée quand même aussi de Donald Trump, on a eu l'accélération ou l'annonce d'un retrait à grand fracas du système multilatéral dont ils avaient eux-mêmes posé les fondations au sortir de la Seconde Guerre mondiale, comme vous le disiez tout à l'heure. il ne faut pas oublier l'impact financier qu'a le retrait américain. L'impact financier, ça va au-delà du USAID qui a retiré 60% des subventions mondiales en matière de solidarité. C'est quand même 25% du financement de l'ONU, c'est 30% des financements des opérations de maintien de la paix, etc. etc. Donc c'est un phénomène aussi très déstabilisateur dans le multilatéralisme. Et derrière ce démantèlement méthodique, il y a le fait de l'affaiblissement d'une idée pourtant très simple, hein, enfin moi qui me semblait jusque-là, qui était acceptée par tous, qui était que nous avons normalement besoin les uns des autres pour ne pas basculer dans la violence et que tout le monde acceptait l'idée que la stabilité même relative était dans l'intérêt de tous. Et c'est cette idée-là qui s'est effondrée là et qui on a tendance, alors qu'elle était très acceptée, on a tendance aujourd'hui à la réfuter. Et bien sûr, nous assistons à une montée de ces deux grands empires, le retour des empires avec la Chine d'un côté, mais surtout effectivement avec les États-Unis qui viennent et ont fait le choix de désormais s'appuyer sur une diplomatie transactionnelle pour porter la vision impériale. Et là, vous posiez la question de vers quoi on va. Moi, je poserais la question surtout de qu'est-ce qu'on peut faire, nous, là-dedans. En tout cas, moi, quel rôle peut jouer la France, quel rôle peut jouer l'Europe. Et je pose la question de l'Europe à dessein, car il ne faut pas oublier qu'elle trouve aussi son origine dans le refus des pays européens à l'époque de se retrouver, vous savez, dans ce qu'on appelle, nous, en France, le casse-noisette, c'est-à-dire coincé entre l'Empire américain et l'Empire soviétique. Et la construction européenne s'est faite là-dessus. Donc c'est pour ça que je pose la question de l'Europe. Quel rôle peut jouer la France et l'Europe? S'agissant de la France, je suis de ceux qui pensent qu'elle garde quelque chose de précieux, en fait, une voix qui porte, un réseau diplomatique, etc., un siège permanent au Conseil de sécurité. Et effectivement, ce n'est plus suffisant aujourd'hui pour écrire l'avenir du monde, mais cela suffit pour porter une voix singulière, mais il faut en avoir les moyens. Et certains interlocuteurs ont eu raison de dire aujourd'hui, il n'y a qu'en système multilatéral qu'on peut répondre aux enjeux du moment, que ce soit l'enjeu climatique, les enjeux numériques, les enjeux alimentaires, migration. Aucun de ces défis ne peut être réglé dans des tête-à-tête bilatéraux, aucun. Ou par de la diplomatie transactionnelle. Nous avons besoin de mécanismes communs, de financement indépendant des humeurs politiques de tel ou tel pays ou de coalitions qui dépassent les clivages régionaux, ça a déjà été dit. Mais encore faut-il prendre conscience du moment. Donc voilà, moi je pense qu'on peut passer du temps à souligner les failles du multilatéralisme, elles sont nombreuses, paralysie du Conseil de sécurité, incapacité de répondre à certaines crises, etc. Mais qu'est-ce qu'on a proposé de mieux pour l'instant? On n'a rien proposé de mieux. Moi je ne crois pas, en fait je suis de ceux qui ne croient pas à ce que la réponse soit celle qu'on habille sous ce grand vocable là, vous savez, du Sud global. À mon sens, c'est se tromper de diagnostic que de croire que ça va passer vers le Sud global et qu'il y a quelque chose à construire avec cette mosaïque d'intérêts souvent divergents. Ça peut être même dangereux. Donc la question n'est pas tellement de remplacer le système multilatéral, mais comment faire, comme vous avez dit, pour que la mondialisation qui n'a pas été heureuse, qui a abandonné une grande partie des pays, puisse les intégrer. Comment faire aujourd'hui pour que le système multilatéral, qu'on puisse le préserver, mais qu'il puisse intégrer aussi ces acteurs désormais globaux que nous avons et sortir de ce système multilatéral qui jusque-là était occidentalo-centré quelque part. Et il faut construire là-dessus et je pense qu'on ne doit pas perdre un horizon vraiment qui est que de toute façon on ne pourra pas, comment dire, dans ce moment de rupture, tout ce qu'on peut peut-être essayer de faire là en ce moment, c'est faire en sorte que les règles ne disparaissent pas totalement, vous savez. On ne peut pas empêcher toutes les crises, mais au moins empêcher que la loi du plus fort devienne le seul horizon. Peut-être qu'on poursuivra ensuite sur les constructions d'avenir là-dedans.
Thank you very much. And this round we will finish with General Trincon. And the same question, whether the multilateralism is collapsing.
Merci beaucoup. Alors quand on dit déclin, on veut dire à un moment, la fin du déclin, c'est la disparition. Or je vais reprendre une loi de la physique bien connue. Rien ne se perd, rien ne se crée, tout se transforme. Le monde sur lequel nous sommes, Monsieur Jacques l'a bien prévu, c'est 1945, la création des Nations Unies et du multilatéralisme. En 1945, il y avait 50 pays aux Nations Unies. Aujourd'hui, il y en a 193. Dans les 5 permanents, au passage, je souligne qu'à l'époque c'était la Chine, mais c'était la Chine de Taïwan, qui a été remplacée par la Chine continentale. Deuxième chiffre intéressant à retenir, la puissance économique. Le G7, en 1970, représentait 70% du PIB mondial. 70%. Aujourd'hui, il représente 30%. Donc les rapports de force ont considérablement changé. Au sein des Nations Unies, qu'on critique beaucoup, aujourd'hui, on a vu une période après les années 90 où elle a été très active, était pas mal impliquée dans les opérations de maintien de la paix, mais on oublie qu'entre 45 et 90, elle était plutôt figée par l'affrontement entre le bloc soviétique et le bloc dit libre à l'époque. Aujourd'hui, depuis, j'allais dire 25 ans, à peu près, la loi du plus fort prévaut. Elle a prévalu en particulier avec les États-Unis. Je voudrais rappeler 2003, j'étais aux Nations Unies, j'ai vu l'argumentaire mis pour attaquer en Irak, qui a été une catastrophe pour tout le Moyen-Orient. La loi du plus fort par les Américains, par les Russes ensuite, à la suite du discours de M. Poutine en 2007 à Munich, et qui a conduit à ce qu'on connaît sur la Géorgie, sur la Syrie, sur l'Ukraine, où nous sommes aujourd'hui. Donc mon sentiment est que avoir 193 pays qui se réunissent, c'est déjà un formidable succès. 193 pays pour l'avoir beaucoup pratiqué dans les couloirs de l'ONU qui peuvent se parler. La difficulté, bien sûr, c'est la gouvernance. Et on parlera de la gouvernance, ça fait 30 ans, 40 ans, je ne sais plus, qu'on parle du Conseil de sécurité qui doit se changer, etc. Un petit point particulier sur les rapports de force, au-delà de l'économie et du nombre de pays, la démographie. On n'en parle pas assez. Le seul continent en croissance démographique, c'est l'Afrique. Tous les autres continents sont en décroissance démographique. Et l'Europe n'est pas en décroissance, elle est en chute démographique. Ceci va avoir des impacts colossaux dans les 25 ans à venir et rajoutera encore dans les changements de rapports de force. Et je crois que dans le multilatéralisme, il faut prendre en compte ces rapports de force sur la multiplicité des pays, sur l'importance relative de chacun des pays, l'Inde, puissance montante extraordinaire, l'Afrique également, même si l'Afrique n'est naturellement pas un pays, et 54 pays différents. Mais il faut prendre en compte ces rapports de force pour créer un multilatéralisme avec une gouvernance adaptée. Je vous remercie.
Thank you very much. Before I will start with the questions addressed to each of our panelists, I would like to inform our audience that at the end of the session, I will leave around 20 minutes for the questions for you, so you can also ask questions directed to specific speakers. All right, and now I would like to start with Your Excellency Shukri. We have mentioned the new power centers, and I would like to ask you, how should influence be redistributed in global governance so that the new power centers are recognized and not just represented?
Your question proceeds to assume that the sphere of shifting powers is conducive to an equilibrium that might exist. And that isn't necessarily the case. I believe that the current shift is more out of necessity and out of practical ability, and does not necessarily conform to the principles that I started by speaking about, which should have transitioned more effectively to the 21st century is that a world order based on cooperation and shared values, and that which relinquishes antagonism and the expansionist tendencies, and that predominance necessarily has to come at the expense of the other, rather than a more benevolent environment where mutual interests govern. So here the reliance that the issues of transition and power structures will probably result in the same outcomes that we are facing and challenges that exist today, if the mindset itself is not different. And the mindset is not being promoted because of a tendency of isolationism on the one hand, and a reluctance to engage by a major, if not the major power, which is the United States. At the same time, a rise of antagonism, whether it's related to the potential of the emergence of China as a competitor, or in dealing with regional perspectives that do not conform to what is perceived as the more acceptable and facilitative directions of certain international players. If we don't reconcile those, then I think we'll have the same result, whether there is a shift of spheres of influence. Now, there are, at the regional and multi-regional levels, and I think maybe in your concept paper you alluded to that, the emergence of configurations such as the BRICS, for example. But unfortunately, the BRICS might be handicapped from the perspective of others by the participation of both Russia and China, which represent to the United States the antagonism and that we have witnessed over the last maybe 4 or 5 years, because this did not start with this Trump administration, but more effectively during the Biden administration. But it does have an opportunity if it does promote and advocate that its role is not to supersede, but rather to create a more benevolent dynamics within what are emerging and new centers of influence, like China, that their narrative is more inclined to concentrate on their own development and the consolidation of ideas of a common nature, and depart from a more exclusive perspective. So we I think can have some expectations that the new centers of power will be constantly shifting, as they have done historically. Whether they are a positive contribution or a negative will depend on the ideologies that are behind the emergence of these powers.
Thank you very much. Sir Fox, I decided to change a question for you because on the screen we could see a picture of President Donald Trump and Prime Minister Viktor Orban, and it inspired me to ask you whether do you believe that universal frameworks are still viable when there are certain countries that prioritize sovereignty, self-interest, security, and self-resilience?
I think that while we have varying geometry inside institutions, I completely agree with His Excellency that what we require is a focus on shared values. And I think that we need to accept we live in a world, first of all, where we are in a permanent tension between freedom and repression, between the rule of law and arbitrary justice, between free markets and capitalism and applied market, anti-market economies. And I think that we have to be careful not to make a moral equivalence between them. Recognize, for example, that the application of free markets have taken 2 billion people out of abject poverty over the last 50 to 60 years. and not throw out the baby with the bathwater. That's basically what I'm saying. I think there are underlying shifts in all of this. I think there's a crisis of confidence in the West in particular. And I think that really goes to the heart of many of the political reactions we're seeing, the indebtedness of the West. I take my own country, the United Kingdom. Last year, our government borrowed £140 billion, the gap between spending and taxation. We spent 105 billion of that on debt interest. And we have a smaller level of debt interest than the United States or France. All Western countries are now reaching the point where for a long time we have just spent today and hoped that tomorrow would take care of itself. Now we're finding that there is a crisis, a fundamental crisis in the West that we are now being forced to address, at least some of us. That is undermining our confidence in the wider institutions because it's forcing us to worry much more about our own internal problems. We haven't got an international consensus about how we deal with some of these issues, but what I would say is we have to be very, very careful about this question of moral equivalence and to talk about, a US empire and a Russian empire. There's no Russian empire. Russia's got an economy smaller than Italy's. The United States is the world's biggest economy, a bigger military than the next 11 put together. There's no real equivalence in this. We've got to be very, very careful about how we view this. But I go back to the point I made earlier. I think that a lot of things are providing an attraction for populism because it provides short-term answers in a difficult political environment. And I'm afraid, and it's a terrible generalization, but I don't think we see the standard of global leader in recent times that is willing to go beyond short-term popularity or short-term unpopularity to lead us into a different and much more ethically and values-based future. And when I look at the era of Ronald Reagan and Margaret Thatcher, and how I wish they were back.
If you allow me, I would like to follow up with a very short question because you mentioned the shared values. But do you think that nowadays, does the order actually require shared rules, shared values, or maybe shared strength?
I think shared values are really important. I think it's to give hope to people that we actually value freedom, that we actually value the rule of law, that we actually value where we can reach consensus, and that we can create an equilibrium through that. Yes, I think we should hang on to that. I think values do matter. And I think that when you consider the other side of that ledger, to those who say, well, we can't have moral superiority because these are just different values. I don't think our values are just different. I think our values are better.
Thank you very much.
May I just add that these shared values, their credibility lies in their implementation. It's not going to be enough for the rhetoric to pull us through.
Thank you very much. Your Excellency Lajczak, has the era of consensus diplomacy passed? Because I have a feeling sometimes, especially when I'm waking up in the morning and I'm checking X, I feel like nowadays we have actually a diplomacy in the way of social media. At least that's my feeling. You can have a different approach to it. So has the era of consensus diplomacy passed, or can negotiation formats still be adapted to today's realities?
Well, this is a question that is very close to my heart because I am a professional diplomat and diplomacy has been my job and my passion throughout my life, and I think a lot about it. And I'm not happy about the current state of diplomacy. I think we are underappreciating the importance of diplomacy because diplomacy is meant to address problems or to address potential problems before they become real problems. And the main instrument of diplomacy is the dialogue. And of course, you cannot restrict this dialogue only to the people who think the same way as you do, because then there is no need for the dialogue. The purpose of diplomacy is exactly to talk to people who may not share your views, and basically the philosophy is why we differ. And let's see whether we can find like overlapping points, and that would be the beginning of addressing the problem. You know, Ronald Reagan once said that I would rather settle for 80% of what I wanted than to jump over the cliff with my flag proudly waving. Now I have the feeling that we are going for the opposite. We would rather jump off the cliff with waving our flag, because we are afraid that if we agree to a compromise, we will be criticized that the compromise is not good enough. But everything that our civilization has achieved in the past, and I can refer to the Universal Declaration of Human Rights or UN Charter, or the Helsinki Final Act of 1975, and so on, was a result of compromise. This was not the 100% for one country or one group of countries. You have to listen to others, and you have to be able to accommodate what does not go against your vital interests or basic values. But right now, it really looks like it's easier for diplomats to say, I refuse this compromise because I stood firm ground, but the result is we are empty-handed. We fail, and we keep failing. So therefore, yeah, what is different now is that diplomacy is happening in the direct live broadcast in a way. And the moment the process is taking place, there are people already commenting on it, on X, on different platforms, or social platforms, and to accept the responsibility for a deal. I mean, you can achieve a great deal, and next day you might be crucified because people will say, but it's only 90%, and you should have aimed for 100%. But again, I like quotes of smart people. Nelson Mandela said, if you want to make peace with your enemy, you have to work with your enemy, and then he becomes your partner. It's as simple as that. But what are we seeing now is, no, we don't talk to them because we don't like them, because they are our enemies, or they don't think the way we think. And again, being a diplomat, I really think that diplomats should do diplomacy. The military people should do what they are here for, but our role is, I mean, the moment the soldiers come into play, we have failed, we diplomats, because we were unable to prevent the military conflict. And also, we should not mix diplomacy with activism. Activists are important, they are watchdogs, they are the conscience of our era, but they should not do our job and we should not do theirs. So therefore, I think it's nothing wrong talking to people who may have different views. On the contrary, this is the very, very core of diplomacy. And again, without compromise, what is the alternative? Win and lose. But if we want our solutions to last, it must be a win-win solution. And this can only be based on a reasonable compromise.
And do you think this crisis of diplomacy actually comes from Sir Fox said that there's a lack of this global leadership? Can it be correlated, or these are totally two different topics?
You know, it was always helpful when we had great leaders in difficult times. Yes, someone who could set the path and it was easier to follow. I'm not sure we are having this right now. What I see is even bigger problem is the rules. That means the framework, the red lines that could not be crossed. We don't have this either. And that's why this opens the space for populism or for spreading open lies. And then people, I mean, the irony is that there has never been easier access to information, and yet people have never been more confused and unable to tell what's the truth and what's lie. And that's also an issue that will need to be addressed.
Thank you very much. Ambassador Kandil, recent crisis exposed certain limits in global conflict response. Is this a breakdown structural or rather cyclical?
Well, as I just mentioned in my previous intervention, it reflects something that's bigger than trying to reform the United Nations. The crisis is mainly a result of a generational shift in the power structure. The world that has been established after the Cold War is changing, and most importantly, those who created the system are now turning their backs to it. They're changing the goalposts in the middle of the game. We've been talking, of course, the moment of the New World Order after the end of the Cold War was a moment of huge expectations across the world, and definitely international cooperation was at its peak. But at the same time, this is also the world that witnessed Rwanda, witnessed Yugoslavia, witnessed Iraq. Let's not become so nostalgic about this world that we had. The double standards had been in applying international law has been there for so many years. Now we are approaching a moment where this system is in the process of change. I've seen in your concept note and guiding questions a reference to whether we need something else other than the United Nations. No, the United Nations, if we didn't have the United Nations, we need it now more than ever. If we didn't have and the problem with the United Nations is not about reforming the Secretariat. The problem, as I mentioned, is in the current world order that is preventing the world from the United Nations from advancing. Actually, let's not actually be extremely harsh on the United Nations. The United Nations is not just the Security Council. The United Nations has an unmatched convening power. It has almost universal membership. The United Nations has a very important role in norm settings, and we should reinforce the United Nations. Definitely it needs reform, either in the Secretariat or in the governance, especially in the Security Council. But let's not think that the United Nations is part of the problem. It's rather part of the solution.
Thank you very much. So UN is part of a solution, not part of the problem. I would have a question to His Excellency Benčiek, a little bit in connection to what Ambassador Kandil just mentioned. Do you believe then that maybe we need, it's a bit controversial, but do we need fewer actors at the table, or rather more voices, and maybe it will make either of this, either conflict resolution quicker and more effective?
Plus d'acteurs ou moins d'acteurs, en fait, vous posez la question de comment, vers quel aussi type de réforme aller, parce que plus d'acteurs ou moins d'acteurs, en tout cas moi je ne crois pas en la diplomatie transactionnelle, ça veut dire celle des tête-à-tête, et pour résoudre les conflits avec des tête-à-tête, ça c'est pas durable. Si on veut des résolutions durables, bien sûr, il faut du consensus, il faut de l'intégration, etc. Mais c'est vrai qu'aujourd'hui, on est dans un moment, je dirais, qui est encore plus difficile. Vous avez eu raison de dire que le multilatéralisme a été déceptif. Il y a eu l'Irak, par exemple, qui a été vraiment un moment très déceptif. On était à la sortie des années 90, le grand moment multilatéral, où on parlait de fin de l'histoire, etc. Et il y a ce moment déceptif de l'Irak. Et on se dit, bon, bah, finalement, le Conseil de sécurité ne permet pas d'arrêter les catastrophes. Moi, je suis de ceux qui disent, bah, au moins, ça permet de les endiguer. Au moins, ça permet de continuer d'avoir un certain nombre de règles de fonctionnement. Aujourd'hui, on est dans une étape encore plus loin. Et je trouve je pense qu'on a, je ne sais pas si on a complètement conscience de l'ampleur des ruptures du moment. Ça veut dire que, encore une fois, je me répète, on est dans un moment où un acteur comme les États-Unis ne croit plus, en tout cas c'est ce qu'on voit, ne croit plus que son intérêt réside dans une certaine régulation mondiale, dans une certaine stabilité, même si elle est très relative. Il n'y croit plus. Je veux dire, et ça c'est problématique parce que c'est ça qui a fondé normalement le système multilatéral, c'est croire que la stabilité, elle est dans l'intérêt de tous, et quand on a le principal acteur qui est à l'origine, qui ne croit plus à ça, on est sur une rupture fondamentale. Donc oui, il faut plus d'acteurs dans le sens où il faut intégrer tous ceux qui ont été laissés pour compte. Ça, c'est la chose que le multilatéralisme n'a pas su faire ces 20 ou 30 dernières années. Et il va falloir un moment y arriver, mais on est dans un moment encore plus difficile pour y arriver parce qu'il y a cette rupture. Et même l'Europe, enfin je parle des États-Unis, mais même l'Europe, je veux dire, c'est un moment où on est confronté à des défis sécuritaires qu'on n'a pas vus depuis très longtemps, où on a par exemple aussi, là aussi, même l'Europe, je suis même plus très sûr qu'on dit beaucoup qu'on croit en le multilatéralisme, etc., etc. Mais je suis même plus très sûr, on est très renfermé en ce moment sur nous-mêmes, sur nos difficultés, vous le disiez tout à l'heure, sur la question de la dette, sur la question... Et donc on voit en Europe, par exemple, s'effondrer le financement des solidarités internationales. Donc est-ce qu'on croit vraiment sauver le multilatéralisme quand dans le même temps, nous-mêmes, nous nous retirons et nous arrêtons aussi, enfin, ou en tout cas nous diminuons très fortement le financement des solidarités. Et moi, ce qui m'inquiète, donc ça c'est très inquiétant, le moment est inquiétant, ou alors quand on voit que le seul acteur qui aujourd'hui défend le multilatéralisme, c'est la Chine. Et la Chine a une lecture de la charte qui est quand même assez particulière. C'est une défense d'abord de la souveraineté, etc. Donc voilà, moi, c'est le contexte surtout qui est problématique. Oui, il faut une réforme du système des Nations Unies. Oui, il faut une réforme du multilatéralisme pour intégrer pleinement tous les acteurs globaux qui ont un intérêt. Après, mais on est dans un moment quand même particulièrement délicat parce qu'on a un grand acteur qui ne croit plus que la stabilité est dans son intérêt. Et ça, c'est quand même très problématique, à mon sens, pour l'avenir et pour continuer de porter cette idée que ce sont d'abord les règles communes qui permettent d'éviter les catastrophes. Et la diplomatie ne permet jamais, en fait, de résoudre un problème. Elle permet en général de l'endiguer. C'est jamais satisfaisant. Mais c'est toujours mieux que rien, c'est toujours mieux que de la confrontation, c'est toujours mieux que de la guerre, c'est toujours mieux que de la violence. Et les diplomates sont là normalement pour retarder l'échéance, pour endiguer, voilà. Mais oui, il faut ouvrir bien sûr à d'autres acteurs et le tête-à-tête bilatéral et la diplomatie transactionnelle, pour moi, n'est pas porteuse d'avenir et n'est pas porteuse de solutions.
I think we are missing a American speaker at this panel discussion because it would, I think, put us in a closed circles. But I would follow up a little bit because you have mentioned, at least how it was translated to me, that USA doesn't believe anymore that its interest is also in other regions of the world. And let me address it from a more European point of view. Shouldn't it be actually the responsibility of Europe to take care of its own security? And that's a follow-up question.
D'ailleurs, c'est ce qu'elle a décidé de faire. C'est ce qu'elle a décidé de faire. On voit bien qu'aujourd'hui, le retrait américain de l'OTAN, en tout cas, pas un retrait de l'OTAN, mais dire qu'il n'activera plus forcément l'article 5, etc., fait que ça a été le démarrage enfin de la construction d'une défense européenne. Si au moins il y a un point positif à tout cela, c'est qu'au moins l'Europe s'est lancée dans la construction de sa défense. Mais pour autant, moi ce que je mesure, c'est que ce qui est dommage, c'est que le retrait américain de l'OTAN, donc le retrait de la garantie de sécurité américaine, a tout de suite permis une réaction forte des Européens et qui ont tous augmenté leurs dépenses en matière de défense, etc., pour se restructurer. Et il y a enfin posé sur la table de comment structurer une défense européenne. Par contre, le retrait, moi je fais l'équivalent, c'est-à-dire quand les Américains se retirent aussi des Nations Unies, là c'est le retrait de la garantie de stabilité américaine. Ce n'est pas une garantie de sécurité, mais c'est une certaine garantie de stabilité relative, quelque part. C'est un retrait, et là, la réaction n'est pas à la hauteur. Il n'y a pas réellement de réaction. Autant il y a eu une réaction très forte sur le retrait de la garantie de sécurité américaine, autant il n'y a quasiment pas de réaction sur le retrait de la garantie de stabilité américaine. Et c'est réellement ça qui me semble aujourd'hui inquiétant. On devrait s'en inquiéter autour de cette table, ce peu de réaction. On continue de parler de réformes, etc. Bon, porter finalement, essayer de rhabiller des idées anciennes, mais il serait temps peut-être de le faire activement et se donner les moyens de le faire.
All right, thank you very much. Sir Fox, quick intervention, and then we will go to General.
It's on this point of NATO. If you want shared benefits, you have to have shared burden. And that's been the big problem inside NATO. When I was UK Defence Secretary, way back in 2010, 2012, and Robert Gates was the American Defence Secretary, we constantly argued at NATO that sooner or later the patience of American taxpayers would be broken, carrying Europe's defence while Europe could spend much more on welfare. Europe, including the United Kingdom now, is 6% of the global population and accounts for 60% of global welfare spending, and has been riding on the coattails of the United States on defence for far too long. This was a necessary day of reckoning that was coming, that Europe could no longer expect American taxpayers to pay for their defence while they paid for European welfare. And that point has been well warned about. So any attempt to blame the Americans for this and the Trump administration for which was a problem of European making, I think is very wide of the mark.
Thank you very much. General Trincon, the current crisis response models, the current ones, still reflect the military realities of the 21st century.
Oui, et ça me permet de parler, de revenir un peu sur le sujet de l'Europe qui se réarme, qui prépare sa défense, mais qu'on soit bien clair, le rapport n'a rien à voir. La puissance militaire américaine, absolument gigantesque, j'ai eu l'occasion de travailler avec eux, incomparable dans le monde aujourd'hui, alors que les Européens cherchent à augmenter leur défense pour se défendre. Les Américains ont développé leur puissance pour être une puissance. L'Europe a oublié ce que c'était que les empires. Nous en avons suffisamment souffert. L'empire russe, allemand, britannique, français ont tous été des facteurs de guerre. Et l'Europe a installé depuis 1945 une ère de paix dans laquelle la guerre était exclue. On n'y pensait plus. Il y a eu évidemment l'épisode yougoslave que j'ai bien vécu de l'intérieur, mais c'était un épiphénomène au moment de la chute du mur et de l'éclatement de la Yougoslavie. Pour le reste, les Européens se sont dit « la guerre, c'est plus pour nous » et comme on n'a plus de velléité d'être des empires, on n'a pas besoin de se répandre dans le monde avec nos armées. Et donc elle s'est trouvée comme dans la fable de La Fontaine, la cigale et la fourmi, bien dépourvue quand la guerre fut venue. Et c'est ce qui se passe en ce moment. Et donc aujourd'hui, les Européens se réarment, mais c'est simplement pour se défendre, pour se protéger, et pour ne plus dépendre tous les 4 ans du vote de 20 000 électeurs de l'Idaho ou du Texas, puisque soit démocrate, soit républicain, le parapluie n'est plus placé au même endroit. Donc je crois qu'aujourd'hui, l'état des forces militaires dans le monde repose sur des empires, États-Unis, Chine, Russie qui se rêve en empire, même si c'est un empire déclinant, et Europe qui veut se consolider pour arriver à exister et à continuer à exister comme une ère de prospérité et de liberté. Je reviens juste sur le point du rapport et de la diplomatie et de l'armée pour vous citer Bismarck. Bismarck disait « La diplomatie sans armée, c'est comme une musique sans instrument ». Les deux sont complémentaires et nécessaires.
Thank you very much. I would like to go to His Excellency Shukri. And my question would be, whether is the value-based model sustainable under the strategic competition, or must interest prevail?
Well, in the current environment, interest seems to be prevailing, but that doesn't exclude that there should be ambitions, that it should not be the case, and that common values should be the predominant motivator of the formulation of international relations and its implementation. How do we rectify the divergence between the two is a matter of a philosophical nature, and it's one that depends on our evolution and development. It was going presumably in the right direction, although, of course, even after 45, there was a predominance of the influence of one sector of the international community by virtue of its abilities, its military prowess, its economic predominance. Thereby, it was still motivated on the basis of interests, but framed within the context of the commonality of values. And that was generally accepted because of its aspirational nature, even though everybody turned a blind eye on the facts and the actual situation that was being applied, because it was shrouded in the presumption that there were an implementation of those values, whether it was human rights or non-interference or otherwise. So it still remains a matter of to what degree do we shift from confrontation and rivalry to a more cooperative environment where mutual interest and the degree of accommodation and compromise and willingness to take into consideration other perspectives and not solely exclude the interests of others. I think lessons are to be learned from the past, and it's interesting that the discussion related to the structures of NATO and the role of the United States, but then even that was a barter of Europe taking benefit from the umbrella of protection that the United States provided, but in return there was an alignment of positions on which Europe readily provided what was deemed as the free world perspective. Now again, these are issues of mutual interest, and I can understand that, but at the same time, I think we should recognize the status of the circumstances where we have arrived in. And I don't know whether in the future the new configurations, and I totally agree that I think one of the deficiencies currently is the lack of leadership with vision and a willingness to make decisions on the basis of principle rather than on the basis of pure, raw national interests. And here again, it is the emergence of nationalist and exclusionary politics that maybe poses a threat to all of what we have been discussing. And the more that these national tendencies will emerge, the more dangers we will have. And we see that rise, whether in the US, whether it's in Europe, whether it's in Israel, and thereby complicating the international community's unanimous endorsement of a two-state solution because it does not conform with the ideological basis of what is happening there. And this is repeated in various sectors of the world where these nationalistic, isolationist policies are being advocated.
To the barter that you mentioned between Europe and US, and the fact that, of course, Europe for many ages was under the American umbrella, and of course the barter part, which is the fact that then Europe is in alignment with the free world. But I would also add billions of dollars that were actually spent on American equipment, and I think that's also in the interest of both partners. Sir Fox, you have mentioned that we are experiencing a crisis of confidence in the West. And I would also ask you whether we're also experiencing some kind of a crisis of trust, and whether cooperation nowadays can exist without trust.
Well, I think to get to trust, you have to go along a spectrum of tolerance, peaceful coexistence, mutual respect to get to trust. I think that explains perhaps why there's a bit of a breakdown on that. I would draw a differentiation from some of the previous views on patriotism and nationalism. Patriotism is pride in your country and your heritage. Nationalism tends to be your dislike of somebody else. And I think that's what makes one a good thing and what makes the other a very dangerous one. I think that when we are talking about all of these elements, it takes us back to our own first principles. Into differentiating between the United States and Europe, when very largely the ideological views, the concept of inalienable human rights, of democracy, of freedom, that's what links them. Okay, and that is, there's a clear historical, intellectual thread in that. And I would say this, that we need to think about the next generation in the world, young people in the world. I'm lucky, I live in freedom. I live within a rule of law that is fair and equitable and predictable. I'm able to choose the government under which I live. I'm able to choose my own religion. I'm able to choose my own occupation. If I have benefited from all of those things, in my view, I have a moral duty to ensure that the next generation in the world also benefits from the same things. I'm not going to compromise on the moral values that I believe have given us the freedom and all the privileges that we have. I want them to be endowed more widely into the next generation. That doesn't mean that we cannot have diplomacy, we cannot have conversations. We won the Cold War without physical conflict because we were economically stronger, and because, in my view, we were morally and politically stronger than the Soviet Union, which was the alternative. And so peace is not just the absence of conflict, it's much more. It's a set of values and a set of beliefs. And I think that we have to restore the confidence in those values in the West to give us the chance of reshaping the future for young people in the world, so that they can have all the opportunities that we have got, that we seem rather too willing to trade away sometimes today.
Thank you very much. Your Excellency, Lajczak, which is a greater obstacle? Institutional structure, or maybe rather political will?
Well, we need both, but the political will is the key, because if you have a political will, you can use the existing structure or you can adjust the structure. If there is no political will, even a perfect structure will not help us deliver the results, of course. And yes, what we see now is, of course, the absence of this common political will, even in face of phenomena that have been already mentioned here on this panel and that no one denies, like the climate change, or the future of work, artificial intelligence, the global phenomenon of migration. So it should not be difficult to find a necessary political will to address these and other phenomena in a way that will produce no losers, but benefit for everyone participating. But unfortunately, yes, right now there is way more confrontation, verbal, political, and unfortunately also military, than the ability and willingness to find the necessary political will and to address these issues. Although this is exactly what our people are expecting from their political leaders.
Thank you very much. Ambassador Kandil, could smaller, more interest-aligned regional formats provide maybe faster and more realistic crisis mediation?
Well, I think regionalism is not necessarily an alternative to multilateralism. In fact, Chapter 8 of the UN Charter refers directly to regional arrangements. So they work hand in hand. And in fact, regional organizations, especially the African Union, for example, and not just the African Union and its regional economic commissions, regional mechanisms within the African Union, they could play a very important role, not just in mediation and peacemaking, but also in peacekeeping and in peace building. They have an extensive role to play across the peace and security spectrum. The African Union and its mechanisms are closer to the conflict, closer to the parties. They are often the first responders. They have definitely a bigger role to play in mediation, but also in peace support operations. And of course, one of the main priorities of Africans over the last few years was actually the implementation of Resolution 2719, which was meant to finance 3/4 of the budgets of peace support operations from the assessed contributions in the United Nations. Unfortunately, we're seeing this there's no appetite to implement this resolution right now. Here, I think there is a role for Africans to play, but definitely this role should be supported also by the international community, especially when we're talking about peace support operations in Africa, where already more than the vast majority of peace operations are taking place, and we see the problem with peacekeeping operations in Mali and in DRC. Definitely, this is a trend to be encouraged, where Africans have the chance to find African solutions, to send their own troops in conflict areas with the support and the blessing of the international community. Once again, the financing of African peace support operations here is not a charity. Africans would be doing it according to the Charter and on behalf of the international community.
Thank you very much. Your Excellency Benčiek, we already talked about the loss of confidence in the West, but I would still ask you whether West can still shape global rules in multipolar world.
Est-ce que l'Occident peut encore avoir son mot à dire? J'espère bien, comme dans un monde justement multilatéral qui est censé laisser sa place à tous. Donc j'espère que la place des Occidentaux sera là, mais ça sera un monde effectivement moins occidentalo-centré. Je voulais juste revenir un instant sur l'investissement américain, par exemple sur la sécurité européenne, et qu'aujourd'hui il est compréhensible que le contribuable américain ne veuille plus payer pour la sécurité européenne. Il y a quelque chose quand même là-dedans qui est... C'est là où je disais ça remet en cause fondamentalement tout l'ordre tout l'ordre mondial tel qu'il avait été mis jusque-là, tel qu'il avait été pensé. Faut pas oublier que ces instances multilatérales, et y compris l'OTAN, ont permis aussi de maintenir l'hégémon américain depuis 70 ans. Je veux dire, ça a été un pari gagnant pour les Américains. Mine de rien, la mise en place de ces grandes institutions multilatérales, si on regarde de près, ça a été un pari gagnant pour les États-Unis. C'est quelque chose qui a maintenu la place des États-Unis dans le monde, avec les bénéfices pour tous, pas que pour les Américains, mais ça n'a pas été un pari perdant pour les Américains. Donc ça, c'était juste une petite parenthèse. Maintenant, quelle place pour les Occidentaux? La place des Occidentaux n'existera que si elle laisse la place aux autres, en fait, aussi. Si elle laisse la place qui revient aussi, effectivement, au continent africain, elle laisse la place au sous-continent indien, si elle laisse enfin la place, je parle des Occidentaux en général, c'est quand même ce qu'ils n'ont pas fait pendant 50 ans. Et aujourd'hui, si on ne reprend pas sérieusement cela, vous savez, vous parlez des BRICS, moi tout à l'heure je disais que je ne croyais pas en un Sud global qui s'organise tout seul, etc., de son côté pour remplacer les institutions multilatérales. J'avais même l'habitude d'avoir quelque chose, en France on avait, vous savez, au 19e siècle, en peinture, on avait le salon des refusés. Il y avait la peinture académique, des grands peintres, etc., et ceux qui n'étaient pas exposés avaient monté leur propre salon qui s'appelait le salon des refusés. Bon, il se trouve qu'en France, ça a marché, ça a donné tout le mouvement impressionniste derrière. Mais les BRICS, quelque part, c'est un petit peu le salon des refusés. Vous savez, ceux à qui on refuse l'entrée dans les grandes institutions, on leur refuse leur juste place dans les grandes institutions multilatérales. Et aujourd'hui, si les Occidentaux veulent continuer d'exister, et aussi à travers le multilatéralisme, bah, il faut absolument effectivement donner sa juste place à tous ces acteurs. Sinon, effectivement, bon, bah, il y aura un déclin, tout simplement.
Thank you very much. General Trincon, does stability today depend more on deterrence and capability or more than on legal frameworks?
Et dans les modifications que j'indiquais, les rapports de force avaient changé. Le problème, c'est que l'usage de la force s'est banalisé. Et ça, c'est un problème majeur. Et le rapport de force s'est banalisé. Alors évidemment, on parle actuellement en Europe de l'Ukraine et de la Russie bafouant les traités qu'elle avait signés pour imposer sa force, mais c'est le cas également des États-Unis. J'avais parlé bien sûr de l'Irak, mais c'est le cas en ce moment au Venezuela. Je ne suis pas un grand fan du gouvernement de M. Maduro, mais enfin bon, on peut se poser des questions sur les moyens qui sont employés. Donc je crois que on ne peut pas faire usage de la force si on ne fait pas respecter l'état de droit. C'était le propre des Nations Unies et du Conseil de sécurité. Je rappelle que le Conseil de sécurité, dont je disais qu'il fallait le transformer, mais il reçoit délégation de l'Assemblée générale pour pouvoir utiliser et être le seul à utiliser la force, chapitre 7, faire utiliser la force sous chapitre 7, pour faire respecter le droit. Et c'était les 15, donc les 5 permanents plus les 10 élus, qui considéraient que l'état de droit devant être respecté, ils avaient mandat pour l'utilisation de la force. Le problème, c'est que depuis quelque temps, on n'en tient pas compte. La force est utilisée et la régulation qui existait au Conseil de sécurité n'existe pas à cause du droit de veto. Parce que le droit de veto permet à la Russie de bloquer quand on va parler de l'Ukraine, aux États-Unis de bloquer quand on va parler de Gaza, et donc l'usage de la force et, peut donner libre cours. Donc je crois vraiment que ce que je disais tout à l'heure à propos de la diplomatie et des armées, et donc de la musique et des instruments, les instruments sont là pour travailler dans un orchestre. Et dans cet orchestre, il y a un chef d'orchestre, c'est le respect du droit. Aujourd'hui, on en est loin parce qu'on a un certain nombre de personnes, Monsieur Xi à propos de Taïwan, Monsieur Poutine à propos de l'Ukraine, Monsieur Trump à propos on peut le dire, du Canada, du Groenland, de Panama. Il n'en est pas venu aux mains, mais enfin, son expression est là, qui font qu'on se moque de l'état de droit. Et là, c'est quelque chose d'extrêmement grave, et c'est d'autant plus grave que la puissance militaire donnée à ces pays est considérable. On le voit en ce moment, en particulier en Ukraine.
You mentioned the veto power. Do you think the reform is possible without confronting veto power and the interests? Yes, because you have mentioned the veto power while you were speaking, and my question would be whether the reform is possible without confronting the veto power and the interests.
Le droit de veto, c'est vraiment, enfin pour l'avoir beaucoup pratiqué aux Nations Unies, c'est vraiment une question clé. La France avait fait une proposition en disant que le droit de veto ne pouvait pas être utilisé s'il y avait crime contre l'humanité ou quelque chose comme ça. Le problème, c'est après ça, quel est l'instrument juridique qui va vous dire que le droit de veto ne peut pas être utilisé. Donc c'est extrêmement compliqué. C'est là où on voit, une petite parenthèse sur la réforme du Conseil de sécurité, ça fait 40 ans qu'on en parle. 40 ans qu'on dit l'Afrique doit être présente. Très bien, l'Afrique doit être présente. Qui va être présent dans l'Afrique? Et là, il y a une guerre entre le Nigeria, l'Afrique du Sud, l'Égypte qui disent moi, et on n'y arrive pas. Donc, le droit de veto, c'est un peu la même chose. Évidemment que les 5 grands, enfin surtout les 3 grands, pardon, refuseront de laisser tomber leur droit de veto. Et donc c'est là où je crois que dans la gouvernance, il y a vraiment un blocage complet. Et vous connaissez les règles, 2 tiers de l'Assemblée générale, le consensus au Conseil de sécurité, eh ben on n'y arrive pas. Et c'est pour ça que c'est bloqué depuis plus de 40 ans.
May I make a comment on the issue of the veto and the reform of the Security Council? And certainly there is a matter of justice, and we all agree that the veto has been a hindrance to the implementation of the mechanism that is responsible for the maintenance of peace and security, which is the Security Council. But then I think it is exaggerated the difficulties that arise because we depart from the principles of justice. I can live with the continuance of the veto, but as long as it is provided to other members, the expanded United Nations. And here, again, it's not a matter of rivalry. I think the pretext that some of the hindrances related to who in the African continent would represent it is a matter to be left to the African continent to decide. And it hasn't been given that opportunity because there's a lack of seriousness. Thereby, there's absolutely no need to indulge in that process, whereas the issue in itself is not practically attainable. So it's a matter of justice. If we are to preserve the veto, then that right should extend to the expanded membership, and the expanded membership could certainly be justified to have the ability to veto on the principle that it represents a wider margin. If we see the current configuration, we have 3 permanent security members who are aligned in terms of their overall political perspectives. France, the United Kingdom, on the basis of previous imperial predominance, and the United States, but they represent one segment of the international community, and thereby there's an imbalance there in itself. So we either do away with the veto totally, or we expand the veto to others who are also capable of representing maybe even a wider segment of the international community and have the justification of obstructing directions that they do not feel are beneficial to the representation of this global South, which still does form the majority of the international community.
If there are some interventions, I need to be fair towards our audience because I promised them that I will open the floor. So first of all, I would like to address now our audience and see if there are any questions there's one and there's second. Do we have someone with the microphone who could? Oh yes, thank you very much. So if you could introduce yourself and then ask the question, thank you.
Hello. Hello, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, I'd like to acknowledge for the efforts made to make this event possible and make the opportunity to meet such important people. So concerning my question, me as the vice president of my tertiary school and as a citizen and a teenager, I have many questions concerning our subject, which is how to actively be integrated inside the political and diplomatical topics. And also, I have another question, if it's possible to answer it, which is for future leaders and potential politicals and diplomatics, what would be your advice for us and also for ambitious people? That's it.
I would suggest maybe to collect the questions and then we will answer. So if we could, there was one more question from the lady in the first row. Oh, and one more lady, sorry. Yes, there and there.
Okay, I would like to thank you, all the speakers, for all your speeches, first. And the second, I would like to ask directly Mr. Fox. Okay, so my question, it's gonna be, I would like to ask you about how can the supply chain management can act or adapt a powered, resilient, and sustainable model, increasing the fragmentation and the disruption of crises and the time of the technology advancement, David frameworks in the global worldwide. So this is my question. Thank you.
And we have one more question in the first row.
Thank you. I'm Amadeus. I'm the former African Commissioner for Energy and Infrastructure Digitalization. Actually, it's a comment rather than a question. We did not address the issue of the rise of new power dynamics. And when the moderator mentioned social media, it was immediately almost discarded from the discussion. With all the respect that I have for diplomacy and for the institutions that we are talking about, but let us also be fair and realistic. The current governance system, whether at the national or international level, does not represent the youth. And public opinion, influence is happening on the social media, whether we like it or not, whether it's true or not, whether we agree with the algorithms or the firms who are managing the platforms or not. But let us also acknowledge that le monde qui vient, this world that is coming, that there is already a Salon des Rejetés, there's already this, rejected group that find only their voices in the social media. They mobilize each other on the social media. They communicate with each other across continents, and they do not believe in any of the institutions that we are talking about at all. There is a serious generational gap, and this will continue. I mean, it will dig deep, and the gap will continue to be widened as the technology advances. I think we should have a serious discussion about that, and if there's a rise of new power, I think the new power is happening already, and even the United Nations has failed to implement the digital pact that was only 2 years ago. It remained just a text, even though this text is very important and should have, put us on a future trajectory that is much more democratic, because it will involve every voice using the new technologies. And I thank you.
Thank you very much. Do we have volunteer who would like to start answering the question? Well, there was one question addressed to Sir Fox, so if you could start and then please don't hesitate.
Well, it was an extraordinarily, if I may say, complex question about global supply chains. Whether we like it or not, we live in a world where economic globalization has happened. And when I hear politicians saying, I don't believe in globalization, it's a bit like saying, I don't believe in nighttime, because it's a reality. You can't disaggregate global supply chains that have taken a long time to be established overnight without tremendous disruption. And what I would say is that where we do have this integration, which in general terms I still believe is a good thing, because greater interdependence is likely to err on the side of greater stability. When that gets to the point where certain elements of the supply chain which are critical fall into too few hands, then we have to find a counterbalance to that. If your question was really based on whether tariffs are a suitable tool in a global economy, I would say absolutely not. Tariffs do not work. Tariffs ultimately introduce new distortions into a global economy which have to be unwound at some point, either through inflation or unemployment or something else. So that doesn't work. And to the young gentleman who made the point, what should you aspire to? Well, I would go back to the point I made. You should aspire to a world where you are given the freedom to make your own choices, to choose the authority under which you live, to live under a rule of law that is not arbitrary, but is fair and just, that allows you to be rewarded by your own efforts, to make the best of your own innovation and creativity. That's what a free world looks like. That's why I say those values are the things that we should strive for, and those of us who've benefited from them in history have a moral duty to ensure that you and people like you get exactly those same benefits without being regarded as downgraded or tradable for something else.
Thank you very much for the very important questions. I think the issue of the youth is of extreme importance, and once again, this is one of the examples where the United Nations set the norms, but also there is still lack of political will, if you will, to implement it. For example, the United Nations Security Council concluded in 2015 the Youth, Peace and Security Agenda. And it's mainly about the inclusion of youth across the peace and security spectrum. But unfortunately, there's no enough political will to implement it, which makes the comment by Dr. Amani very relevant. Unfortunately, the youth is separated totally from the discussions taking place in the United Nations, and they think that our discussions are extremely irrelevant. Part of it, I think, is that whether we're talking about youth, peace and security agenda, or women, peace and security agenda, we always fall into the trap of tokenism. We bring someone under 30 and give them a seat on the table, or we bring a lady to the table and quite often they don't really represent the priorities, neither of the women, neither of the youth. Why? Once again, because we often choose them from the same background. Very often that they don't represent the underprivileged part of the society, which I think is the essence of the issue of inclusivity. So there's a lot of political will that's needed to integrate youth and women in the peace and security agendas and implement the UN agendas in this regard.
Thank you very much.
May I comment on the issue of youth and the issue of social media? By nature, youth are rebellious, and what has been provided to them by social media, by digital platforms, I think is a positive element where their voices have become more impactful and have resulted in the formulation of policy. And I maybe bring to your attention the example of the most recent recognition by states of Palestine. Now that comes as a direct result of the influence of the social media and the youth and their ideas and their comments that have influenced policy in various countries and have had an impact. So it is a positive development, and whether it is viewed as that youth are being marginalized, on the contrary, I think that they have a platform and an architecture to be more impactful, that their voices are heard more effectively. The issue I think that is more important is that the information that is provided and the volume of information that is provided on the media and its authenticity is probably the more important aspect, that there is an ability to discern what is factual from what is emotional, from what is misinformation and politically motivated to manipulate. And I think the youth will always be boisterous and resentful, but that is in itself the way that societies evolve, and hopefully for the better.
Your Excellency, please.
Yeah, I also wanted to step in first about the participation of young people. I mean, the situation is improving over years, and it is way easier for young people to be present on the world stage than it was 10, 15, 20 years ago. I'm participating in many international organizations, in many conferences, and I see that in everyone there is a part of the agenda dedicated to young people. In everyone there is a discussion with young people. In everyone it has become almost, I mean, a norm or almost obligatory to invite young people and to hear their voice and to hear what they have to say on the agenda. It's hard to imagine an organization that would not have this aspect. United Nations has a special envoy for youth. You have national sections of the UN which are working with the United Nations. There are UN youth ambassadors from each member state, for example. And you have the same with international, in Davos, Munich Security Conference, you name it. How to get there? It's important to start where you are, at the school, to organize yourself with a group of people who are thinking like you, to organize, like a club which is expressing themselves on foreign policy, following, asking questions to politicians, then the national level. And then the mechanisms are already there that will also elevate you to the international level, which also links your question to the last comment about the role of social media. Yes, this is a platform for young people, and not only for young people, but for everyone, basically, to express their views instantly in real time on the issues that are happening. And that's important because it really has an impact on policymakers. This is being taken into account, it's being reflected. Of course, what is, I would say, the question, but that's for a separate panel, is how to avoid manipulation or instrumentalization of this platform. But the fact is that every policymaker has an instant reaction or feedback on the course of action they are taking, thanks to the social media, which is both the blessing and the curse, as I said. But as I said, I don't want to go deeper into this.
Thank you very much.
Oui, merci. Là, vous avez dit que effectivement la jeunesse, par exemple, sur la question palestinienne, avait permis quelque part de maintenir, finalement, ont été les vigies de l'humanité pendant que les États ont failli. Pas seulement la jeunesse, c'est la société civile, les organisations non gouvernementales, c'est tout cela. Je trouve qu'il n'y a pas... Ces 2 dernières années, on a vu réellement l'importance de ces organisations non gouvernementales, de ces mouvements de jeunesse, de cette société civile, pour être les vigies de l'humanité à un moment où effectivement les États ont failli. Et pour revenir sur la question de la réforme, ça c'est une nouveauté aussi qui se pose maintenant avec acuité dans la réforme du multilatéralisme. C'est pas simplement comment prendre en compte les grands acteurs africains, latino-américains, etc. C'est comment prendre en compte aussi la société civile désormais au sein des organisations multilatérales, parce qu'on a vu dans des moments comme ça l'importance qu'elles avaient. Et pour dire pour la jeunesse, moi, il y a quand même deux sujets qui me semble important. On a parlé effectivement du numérique, mais derrière le numérique, derrière la question de l'intelligence artificielle aussi, il y a la question du libre arbitre. C'est ça que vous posiez quelque part comme question, c'est la question du libre arbitre aujourd'hui. Et j'aimerais effectivement qu'on laisse aux générations futures un monde où il y a encore un libre arbitre. Et c'est ça qui aujourd'hui est en danger. Et en fait aussi, la question du changement climatique. Enfin, quand même, c'est l'énorme question qui se pose et qui va peser sur les jeunes. Moi, je veux bien qu'on ne laisse pas de dette financière, comme on dit toujours dans nos pays, on ne laisse pas de dette aux générations futures. Moi, j'aimerais bien surtout qu'on ne laisse pas de dette environnementale à ces générations futures. C'est eux qui vont supporter cette dette environnementale et il y a de quoi s'inquiéter. Je veux dire, à un moment où la COP30 à Belém, on n'a même plus de référence quand même aux énergies fossiles. Je veux dire, on est quand même sur un recul assez énorme et c'est ça qu'on est en train de laisser à une jeunesse qui, j'espère, pourra reprendre le flambeau et s'investir, en tout cas, plus que nous.
In general, Trincon, do you have any comment to close?
Juste très bref sur les réseaux. Ne pas oublier que c'est du business. Ceux qui mettent en place les réseaux ont besoin de faire du business. Pour ça, ils utilisent des algorithmes et ces algorithmes, c'est une boîte noire. On ne sait pas comment ils sont générés, régulés. Donc, il y a un bon côté, il y a un très mauvais côté. L'Europe a mis en place une tentative de régulation, le DSA, qui n'est pas tout à fait en œuvre aujourd'hui, mais c'est la seule régulation qui aujourd'hui existe. On va voir quels en seront les effets.
Thank you very much. I would also just add very quickly to the youth policy. I think it's very crucial, but at the same time, especially from the European perspective, we cannot forget actually about seniorial policy because we're all aging population. And in the future, I would say it will require more and more attention from the especially policymaker side. Well, thank you very much to our great speakers. Thank you very much for the discussion. Also, thank you very much to the audience. Thank you very much for your very intriguing questions. And I'm wishing you a lovely day in Tangier. Thank you very much.